Hello, whisperers. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy tonight's tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It helps more than you know. Now, dim the lights, and let's begin tonight's story. The street was too quiet. I could hear the wind pushing trash across the asphalt, wrappers dragging like dry leaves. Somewhere further down, a door slammed against its broken hinge again and again. It was almost rhythmic, the kind of sound that filled in the silence when gunfire wasn't. I walked the line. My boots slid on gravel, the uneven surface of what used to be a suburban neighborhood road. Now it was all sandbags, wire, burned-out vehicles. A school bus stripped of paint sat sideways across the main avenue, its windows replaced with firing slits cut into sheet metal. Behind it, my machine gunners crouched low, belts of ammunition resting on blood-slick pavement. The men didn't look at me. They were too tired to waste energy on that. Hollow faces, soot on their cheeks, fingers tightening and relaxing around triggers like nervous ticks. One of them had dried blood across his chin that wasn't his. He hadn't bothered to wash it off. We had been told this was just a containment line. Hold until sunrise. Reinforcements would push them back. I didn't believe it. The smell in the air told me the truth. Sour rot layered over gunpowder, the kind of stench that stuck in the throat no matter how shallow you tried to breathe. I stopped at the barricade where two privates leaned against welded car doors. Beyond the wire, the cul-de-sac stretched into dark houses. Windows shattered, yards trampled flat, blood smeared across the siding and handprints that dragged toward the ground. Nothing moved, but it felt crowded, like the dark itself was pressing forward. One of the men shifted, his rifle barrel tapping the metal in front of him. He whispered that he thought he saw something. I didn't answer. I had seen it too. A figure at the edge of the street, too stiff to be living. Then another, and another. They didn't charge all at once. They never did. They just walked, steady and inevitable, until there were dozens, then hundreds, eyes clouded white, jaws working even without food, fingers curled into claws of dried flesh. Some still had remnants of who they had been: police uniforms, a delivery jacket, a wedding band glinting on a swollen hand. The first burst of fire cut them down, but the line didn't breathe easier. They dropped, yes, heads split open, torsos shredded into pulp, but the ones behind kept moving forward. Bodies hit the wire and stuck there, twitching. My gunners kept firing, brass clattering across the pavement, smoke rolling up around their faces. I fired too. My rifle cracked against my shoulder, the recoil almost comforting. Every round found soft meat, but it didn't matter. They didn't stop. They fell and rose again. Some dragged themselves across the pavement with broken arms, intestines trailing. The barricade rattled under their weight. Hands pawed at the sandbags, teeth gnashing at the gaps. One soldier stabbed downward with his bayonet, the blade punching into a skull and sticking there. He yanked hard, blood spraying across his uniform, and went right back to firing, Minutes blurred, screams mixed with gunfire, though it was hard to tell who was alive and who wasn't anymore. The front of the wire grew thick with bodies, a shifting wall of rotten flesh pressed together by the sheer number behind them. Each new wave stumbled over the dead, falling into coils of barbed steel that cut them into pieces but never stopped them. By the time my magazine clicked empty, the barricade looked less like a defense and more like a foundation. Corpses stacking layer by layer until the wire sagged. Blood poured down in rivulets, soaking the dirt beneath. The street was gone, hidden under moving, twitching mass. I reloaded and felt it in my chest, the slow certainty that this wasn't an attack. This was something worse. A siege. The wire finally sagged inward. It bent under the weight, barbs snapping loose with a sound like tearing fabric. The bodies pressing from behind shoved the front ranks forward, and the barricade groaned. Reports crackled over the radio. A breach on the left flank, another by the alley that cut behind the old grocery store. Screams bled through the static until the line went dead. I made the choice. We couldn't cover every gap. I left one sector to hold itself, knowing what that meant, and pulled 2 squads to reinforce the alley. Their boots slapped against wet pavement as we moved, rifles clutched, eyes darting at shadows that twitched in the floodlights. The alley smelled worse than the street. Blood pooled against the brick walls, thick and black, shining in the half-light. Something dragged across it, leaving smears. I raised my rifle and motioned them forward. The first figure stumbled out from behind a dumpster. Its face was half gone, jaw broken and swinging loose. It lurched toward us, slipping in the blood. We cut it down, but more came, crawling over the bodies, spilling out like water through a cracked dam. The first squad opened fire, the alley filling with muzzle flashes. The rounds tore into rotten torsos, shredding rib cages into splinters, knocking pieces of spine onto the ground. Still they came, limbs severed, torsos punched full of holes. They crawled forward on elbows, dragging intestines through the blood. I pushed forward with the second squad, grenades in hand. We pulled pins, tossed them over the mound of corpses, and ducked low. The explosions tore the alley open, bodies flung against brick, pieces of jaw and arm raining down, one man wiping something warm and wet from his face without looking at it. Smoke clung to the air. Through it, I could still see them moving. Half bodies, a head with only one arm attached, clawing forward with fingernails chipped to the bone. We advanced step by step, rifles barking, boots crushing skulls. Blood sprayed against the walls in sheets, dripping down into old graffiti. The brickwork was slick beneath my gloves when I steadied myself. By the time we reached the end of the alley, half of them were gone. So were half my men. One was still alive, but only barely. His stomach opened wide, intestines shining wet in the light. He tried to speak. I ended it quick with a single round. The alley was ours again, but the company was fractured. Men looked to me with empty eyes, their uniforms black with blood. The radio hissed with more calls for help, too many, overlapping until it was only noise. I knew what they were asking. I knew I couldn't answer them all. The wire wasn't holding. The flanks were already gone. And the only thing keeping us from being drowned completely was the wall of corpses piling higher with every wave. When the shooting stopped, the silence didn't feel like relief. It pressed in heavier than the noise had. The alley steamed with smoke and gore, a butcher's corridor of bodies stacked on bodies. The men dragged the corpses into piles, boots slipping in the slick mess. Every lift split something open. Steam rose from the torn meat in the cold night air. We doused the heaps with fuel and lit them. The flames reached high, orange light crawling across brick. The heat seared the gore-stained uniforms of the men who stood too close, but none of them moved back. They just watched the shapes twist in the fire. The smell was worse than anything before. Sweet, thick, and greasy. It clung to us, sank into the fabric of our clothes, into the skin. One of the privates gagged into his sleeve. Another sat down in the blood and stared at the ground, eyes glassy, hands trembling against the stock of his rifle. I walked the line again, slower this time. My men avoided my eyes. A few whispered, not about the fire, about the wounded. At the far barricade, I found one of them slumped against the sandbags, pale, sweating. He'd wrapped a rag around his forearm, but the stain bled through dark and thick. His eyes met mine, wide, pleading. He said it was just a scratch. He said he could still fight. His words broke in half when I pulled his sleeve back and saw the bite mark, deep, already black around the edges. The others watched. No one spoke. I drew my sidearm and held it steady. His mouth opened like he wanted to keep talking, but nothing came out. Just a wet rasp. The round hit clean. His head snapped back, and the blood painted the sandbags behind him. The men didn't flinch. One of them bent to strip the ammo from his vest. Then they all went back to staring into the dark. I keyed the radio, voice low. Command came through as static, broken words. Hold at all costs. Reinforcements delayed. That was it. I lowered the handset, hand shaking more than I wanted it to. For a long while, the only sound was the fire and the faint hiss of radios bleeding out nothing. Then, far off, I heard them again. Not single moans, not scattered. A chorus. Thousands of voices in the dark carried by the wind. I knew the quiet was finished. When darkness settled, we tried to keep it away. Floodlights swung from rooftops, their beams cutting through smoke in pale columns. Flares hissed overhead, dripping red light down over the street like slow-burning embers. Every shadow moved. Every window looked alive. The first wave came quiet, crawlers slipping under the wire, torsos dragging themselves with hands worn to bone. They pulled intestines behind them like ropes. Then the mass followed, hundreds rushing, pressed shoulder to shoulder. The wire bent again, groaning under their weight. Machine guns opened. The barrels glowed dull red after minutes of non-stop fire. Belts of brass snaking across the ground. I stood behind the gunners, feeding belts forward, my ears ringing so bad I could barely hear the clink of shells bouncing off the pavement. One gun jammed. The operator fumbled, hands shaking, slick with sweat and blood. Before he cleared it, they were over. A dozen hit the sandbags at once, teeth snapping. I emptied half a magazine into them, each shot sending bone shards into the air. They still kept climbing, hands clawing at the parapet. The barricade gave way in sections. Zombies spilled through like water, knocking men flat. I drew my knife when my rifle jammed, slashing at necks until cartilage snapped under the blade. Hot blood sprayed across my gloves, mixing with sweat until I couldn't tell the difference. We fell back building by building, turning every doorway into a kill zone, firing down hallways, dragging desks and furniture to slow them. It didn't hold. They pushed through bodies and rubble, pieces of themselves coming off as they forced forward. I led a team into a house on the corner. Inside, the walls were smeared with blood handprints. We moved room to room, shooting point blank. One soldier went down when a corpse latched onto his throat, tearing a piece away in one long pull. His scream cut short, wet gurgle filling the air until I put a round through both of them. We retreated up the stairs, firing downward as they came in waves. The walls shook with their weight, plaster cracking, dust filling the air until it coated our teeth. At the top landing, one private slipped in the blood and went down. They were on him before I could drag him back. I saw his legs kick twice, then nothing. His rifle fired once into the ceiling as his hands convulsed, then went still. We broke onto the roof. From there, I could see the whole line collapsing. Barricades torn apart, vehicles overturned, men cut down in the streets. Flares painted everything in shifting red and white, a nightmare stuttering between frames. And beyond it all, stretching into the horizon, the horde didn't end. Just wave after wave, bodies filling the streets, moaning low like a single voice carried on the cold air. The company was gone. All that remained was a handful of us holding on to a rooftop, rifles nearly dry. The night had broken us. By the time the sky lightened, the street was unrecognizable. Smoke clung low over the barricades, drifting across bodies stacked into walls. Blood ran in streams down the gutter, dark and thick, pooling in potholes. The smell hung heavy, burned meat, powder, rot. We didn't talk. There was nothing left to say. The handful of us who had made it to the roof sat in a row, rifles across our laps, faces gray. One man picked at dried blood under his nails. Another stared into the street with eyes that didn't blink. The moaning was gone. The horde had shifted on, drawn somewhere else. The silence felt worse. Every sound carried. The snap of cooling metal, the crackle of a fire burning in the husk of a vehicle, the faint creak of bodies shifting as they settled. I climbed down from the roof slowly, legs heavy, boots slipping on blood-slick shingles. On the street, I walked past what was left of the company. Helmets split open, torsos hollowed out, limbs scattered. The sandbags had collapsed into mud, soaked through. The wire was buried under corpses, barbs snapping out of sight under layers of rotted flesh. I counted as I moved, though I lost track somewhere around 40. They weren't numbers anymore, just faces I had known at the start of the night, faces that didn't look like faces now. At the barricade, I sat down on a slab of concrete. My rifle rested across my knees, empty magazine hanging loose. My gloves were stiff with dried blood. The radio hissed once in my ear, then cut back to static. No orders, no reinforcements. The sun edged over the rooftops, pale and thin. It painted the street in washed-out color, softening nothing. Every shadow stretched long over the bodies. I closed my eyes, but the silence stayed sharp. I knew it wouldn't last. This wasn't victory. It wasn't even survival. It was only a pause. 12 hours bought with the dead. And soon enough, it would begin again.